What's going on, YouTube? My name is Insane Rocker, coming at you live from Yu-Gi-Oh! Today through the power of the internet. So, I know I am way behind on this subject, but today I am going to be discussing Link summoning. Yeah, I'm like, 3 weeks late now? So, in this video I'm going to be talking about what Link summoning is, how it works, and my personal opinions on it, whether I think it's good or bad for the game, and how I think it'll impact Konami as far as economically, and just how I think it's going to affect the game overall. So let's hop right in, shall we? So what is Link summoning first and foremost? Also, I'd like to apologize for the poor quality of this picture. It was the best one I could find that would kind of show the layout of the new board, essentially. So, first and foremost, you can obviously see that the Pendulum zones have been moved, and we have 2 additional monster zones, the extra monster zones as they're called. So first we're going to discuss what Link monsters are. So Link monsters are extra deck monsters that have a new kind of summoning condition. In my opinion, they're kind of not that different from any other. They have certain requirements they have to make, so in many cases just 2 monsters attributed to the graveyard to summon it. Some require certain monster types like machines or the new Cyverse monsters, which are also coming out in the set with Link monsters. So Links have an additional little thing on them. There are little arrows on the monster picture, on the card picture rather, and what they do is they point to a certain zone that is either diagonal or adjacent in some way, shape, or form to the extra monster zone, which is where you summon your Link monsters. So this first and foremost makes the placement of cards very important. Now, where these arrows point to, these are now linked zones, or enabled zones, where you can now summon your extra deck monsters to, because the extra monster zone is now the only place you can summon your Synchros, Xyzs, and Fusions. Lovely, right? But not to worry, you can summon another Link monster to one of your enabled zones, and have those zones that it now points to also be enabled. So basically you're going to have to run bare minimum of 2 Link monsters just to have the majority of your monster zones opened. Now, if you're like most people, they're thinking you're going to have to run 4, 5, 6, even upwards of 8 just to be able to have your extra deck fully unlocked and fully playable, because if you get Raigeki'd, you're in a lot of trouble, because then your Link monsters are gone. So, next is, sadly, in my opinion, kind of sadly, a nerf to Pendulums. Look how sad Yuya is. I've never been a big fan of the Pendulum mechanic, but it's a mechanic, and it's something that we have. So going back to the previous slide, you can see that the Pendulum zones have been moved into the back row. These zones can still be used to set your spell traps, but if you set spell traps there, you cannot activate your scales. So you have to be very careful of where you set spell traps and how many you can set, so there's no more like Klee Demise, set 5, set your scales, pass. You can set 3, set your scales, and pass. So that kind of limits down those types of decks, in my opinion, quite a bit, and it makes them a lot less playable. And that's, assuming that Demise doesn't get hit, which I don't think it will. Anyways, that's for another video. So, Pendulums also have a nerf where you can pin 5 from the hand, but not from the extra deck anymore, unless you have 5 enabled zones, which is, pretty much impossible. Unless you, have a Link monster there, in which case you wouldn't be able to pin 5 anyway, because you'd have one of your main monster zones, as they're now called, taken up by this Link monster that's enabling it. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting because Pendulum decks are now almost unplayable if you ask me. I really feel bad for Pendulum Magician players because they're getting all this awesome new support. I just ran into it today on YGO Pro for my very first time, and they are really good. But they're not going to be able to play it because they're all continuous spell traps for the most part. And really, you need to use as many of them as possible to get their full effectiveness out. And you're not going to be able to really use them because you're having to pick up 2 back row spaces for your Pendulum zones. Personally, I think that the nerf to Pendulum should have either been moving them back to the back row, or making it to where you can't pen 5 from extra deck, but not both. That to me was overkill. So now there's an overall restriction in the extra deck, as I was talking about earlier. You can only summon to the enabled zones. So basically, you can't just synchro summon or fusion summon or Xyz summon in your main 5 zones. You can only special summon from the extra deck, period, to that extra monster zone unless you summon a linked monster. Then the zones that it points to are now enabled. You can synchro and Xyz and fusion. Sorry if I'm saying synchro most of all, because that's my favorite mechanic in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Really. So I personally am very frustrated by this, because as you know, I love synchros. One of my favorite decks of all time is just a Quasar Turbo deck. So this to me is not that great. So really, there's all the facts on links. Going back to what is link summoning and what are link monsters real quickly, something that I forgot to mention is they don't have defense points. They cannot be put into defense points, so things like Castel, flipping it face down, which no one really uses that effect, Book of Moon, Fairy Tale Snow, Swords of Concealing Light, all those things are used against link monsters because they cannot go into defense position, period. So there's that. Anyways, so my personal thoughts on links and link summoning and what it's going to do to the game. I'm not a big fan of it already, but I'm also not against it totally. I mean, I've been screaming at Konami since Pendulums came out because in my opinion Pendulums are very broken. Ask just about anybody and they'll probably agree, even Pendulum players. Pendulums are pretty broken, being able to summon 5 monsters at once. But this to me was not the answer. I've been screaming and begging and just hoping and praying that they will figure something out. But this is not it, in my opinion. This is not what the game needed. At all. You've basically taken, 20 years of evolution throughout the game and tossed it right out the window. This, to me, is going to be Konami's Bay of Pigs. Their Waterloo, whatever you want to call it. This is going to be their biggest blunder, without a doubt, in my opinion. I've seen people already breaking the link mechanic and getting out, 2+ link monsters in a turn. But that, to me, doesn't matter. Because just the idea that they think that this is what's best for the game is just upsetting to me. What they could have done very easily was restrict back a lot of these super fast decks like Zoo, like ABC, where you're able to just set up an unbreakable ward first turn and say, try and break it, like Invoked, and just restrict them back to where they're, I don't want to say unplayable, but at the same time that's what I'm thinking. Make it to where they're not nearly as strong, as powerful as they are now, where they can still, kind of play Rogue if they really wanted to. If someone just absolutely loved the deck and wanted to play the deck, they could play it Rogue or whatever, but not be these huge, just throwing out all these monsters and setting up this big board of things like ABC Buster Dragon or Flesia. Well, if I summon something, it's going to get bottomless. If I summon something else, you're going to banish it anyways. And probably gain more advantage if you're discarding one of your ABC pieces. So I think that limiting back cards like that, decks like that just throw out these insane first turn boards like Paleo, Metal Foes, Zoo, and Invoke. I know I'm mentioning some decks that aren't really all that prevalent right now, but they're still really good at throwing out these big first turn boards. And just overall destroying those decks and just making decks that are slower. Because this is what we have the ban list for. You don't have to make decks that are necessarily better than ones from the previous format. You just have to make sure that those ones from the previous format are not nearly as playable. Still playable, not as playable. And then make new decks that are just as fast, if not even slower, but would be considered better than these really cloggy now decks from the previous format. So, in my opinion, they made a huge mistake with this, and I think it's going to affect them very badly. But they are trying something, and that's what I've been asking for. That's what most people have been asking for, is for them to do something. I actually think they did the right thing. So that's all I have for you today. Leave your comments down below. Like, comment, subscribe.